Hello and welcome. So, what I want to do today is if last time we talked about the rise of nationalism in Europe, and so, we kind of talked about, the revolution of 1848, the rise of German nationalism, this idea of Klein Deutschland, now Germany as the modern state is now born. What I want to do today is talk about how Germany will want its place in the sun, how we're going to get the rise of imperialism, the development of new weapons, and how what this does is this fundamentally changes war forever. But the underlying problem, and we'll see this next week when we start talking about the Russo-Japanese War, the underlying problem is that the European nations have not had a general war, and until World War I will not with these new weapons. The last time these nations had seen, again, something big, something on the scale of the Napoleonic Wars, they were using this, the old flintlock musket, in this case a British Brown Bess. This is actually a repro. But think about it, there's only so much you can do when you have to load it from here and then, muzzle load it and then cock and fire and all that, again, 3 shots a minute tops. The Franco-Prussian War, the Austro-Prussian Wars have shown that any future war will be fought with much deadlier weapons, that the average infantry soldier will have, much higher rate of fire. And what that means is that the casualties will be enormous. But the greatest failing is that nobody is going to stop and actually take a look at that. Nobody is going to say that, hey, maybe we should prep for this, or maybe we should update our doctrines. And that's why World War I will invariably be so bloody. So before we get to that, let's talk about the fallout of Bismarck's War for Empire. And that is, of course, that the modern state of Germany is born. We're going to see that Napoleon III, the Emperor of France, will surrender at the Battle of Sedan in 1870. Paris will be besieged. And on January 28, 1871, they will sign an armistice, which is, in fact, basically a surrender. The French army is largely destroyed. And, I should have kept the image that I, ended with yesterday, or Wednesday. But what we're going to see is on December 10, 1870, the entire North German Confederation is renamed to the German Empire. The fact is this becomes one functioning nation. Each of the smaller nations, Bavaria, Prussia, Hesse, all these places, in effect just become states. And this is proclaimed at the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. That's where that painting was done on January 18, 1871. And König Wilhelm of Prussia now becomes Kaiser Wilhelm I. Now, here's the thing. I just talked about all that stuff of Germany wanting its place in the sun, imperialism, new weapons. But to that, we have to add a motive. Much like a murder, you've got to have a motive for war. And here it is. Because the French had been so decisively defeated, Germany annexed Alsace and Lorraine from France. And so France had this desire of what they called revanche, or revenge. And what we're going to see is from 1871 all the way to 1914, it will become part of the French national culture to advocate for war with Germany. That literally, as a child in school, you are going to be taught that it is your destiny to at some point, go to war with Germany, and you've got to retake the lost provinces of Alsace and Lorraine. These are your countrymen. You have to get them back. You have to save them. And so what we're going to see is when World War I actually happens, when this finally kicks off, that rather than being terrified of war, for the French, this is what they've been advocating for by that time, 43 years. This is the fulfillment of a French national dream. So what you have is overnight, that balance of power we've been talking about since 1814 is gone. Germany is now this dominant state in the center of Europe, and France, the other dominant state in the center of Europe, hates it. The two are going to be at loggerheads, and all it will take is some little spark to touch off a powder keg. Now let's start talking about how we're going to make that powder keg even deadlier. Enter the Russo-Turkish War with its, kind of famous battle here at the Battle of Plevna in 1877. Now, why I want to talk about this war is two things. One, this shows issues in the Balkans, namely the question of the Ottoman Empire being this idea of it's a sick man of Europe, this idea that's existed since the Crimean War of the 1850s. That as the Ottoman Empire begins to shrink, as things like Romania, Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro become independent from this war, what we're going to see is, what this will do is we see Russia encroaching into the Balkans, Russia wanting this as its sphere of influence. But Serbia, Bulgaria, Montenegro, these are next door to Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary, which occupies Bosnia-Herzegovina, says, no, this is my sphere of influence. Remember where this assassination of Franz Ferdinand will take place. As Otto von Bismarck would say, this war will start because of some damned silly thing in the Balkans. And here you go. Starting in 1877, 1878, you get that conflict in the Balkans where Russia is saying, look, we want to expand. We want stuff in the Balkans. We need access to Constantinople. Remember the Dardanelles. If they have the Dardanelles, that gives them access to the Mediterranean. And so this becomes something that Russia is going to want. And again, this is going to simmer for nearly 40 years until it too will pop and you get a larger war. I'm going to have to put like a brighter light bulb in here. I'm sorry that this video on my little thing looks so dark. It starts off bright and then I record and then I have no idea. Oh yeah, there's also rain moving in. That's why it's not quite so bright outside. Sorry about that. So what we see is if Russia is going to be, larger, then what we see is the German monarch, Kaiser Wilhelm II, who will be the main monarch we're going to talk about, desires what he calls the Drei Kaiserbunde, or the League of the Three Emperors, or the Three Emperors League. And the idea for Germany is to try to form a coalition against France. Germany knows France is pissed. Germany knows that France wants revanche. And so Germany says, okay, what we've got to do is try to isolate France. Create an alliance bloc, because that's a good idea, that France will say, we will not go to war with Germany. Now, ideally, the idea is to create a new balance of power. And I mentioned Wilhelm II, but this actually is the work of Otto von Bismarck. Otto von Bismarck, I'm going to click ahead. There we go. Here's Otto von Bismarck. Bismarck is the main architect of German foreign policy until the 1890s. Once Wilhelm II comes in, that's when things get screwed up. Wilhelm II is one of the worst things that ever happened to Germany. Sorry if you're a Kaiser apologist, but the fact is, this guy, he compensates. And part of the reason he compensates is when he was born, he apparently got stuck trying to come out of his mom. So, they get the spoon thingies to pull him out. And somebody grabbed one of his arms and tugged too much and basically pulled it out of the socket and permanently deformed his arm. So, give me just a second. There we go. Stupid Windows update. So one of his arms is permanently deformed. And so for him, he always had this chip on his shoulder. He always had something he had to prove. And so he doesn't want to listen to Bismarck. Well, Bismarck's whole idea is get Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. Because Bismarck, his whole thing, his whole mantra that nobody in the entire course of German military history ever listens to is do not fight a two-front war. They don't listen to it in World War I. Hitler sure as hell doesn't listen to it in World War II. And spoiler alert, Germany loses both wars. Just saying. Bismarck wants to prevent the isolation of Germany. That's his goal. And the thing is, because of antagonism in the Balkans, that's when this will fall apart in the wake of the Russo-Turkish War. Why? Because Germany now has to make a choice. Because Austria and Russia are both competing in the Balkans. And so Germany's got to make a choice. And so what we see is Germany, and you can understand this. I mean, this is not rocket science. Do you support the other German-speaking people or do you support the Russians? But here's what's always kind of confused me. And bear in mind, I'm an American historian, so I'm all about Ron Swanson. History began July 4, 1776. Everything else was a mistake. But Germany and Austria had just been fighting a war. Now they're going to move into an alliance. And I think that's always been one of the most intriguing things about the origins of World War I, is that people don't hold grudges. At least Austria apparently doesn't hold a grudge. The alliance system falls apart in 1887. We see that Germany now, with Wilhelm II starting up, says, no, we're going to support Austria-Hungary. Russia says, okay, never mind. And then 1891 to 1893, you get what's called the Russo-French rapprochement. And what that means is Russia and France, fearing this kind of power consolidation of Germany and Austria, Russia and France now begin to work together. And this was Otto von Bismarck's worst fear, because if they work together, then Germany will be overwhelmed. The population is too much, the size of the army is too much, Germany cannot win a war. This is a disaster as far as Bismarck is concerned. And again, Bismarck is right here. Now, what we're going to see is at the Congress of Berlin, 1878, so this ends the Russo-Turkish War. Let's jump back to that. Bismarck wanted to be what he called the honest broker of Europe. Bismarck, the last thing he wanted was a major war. He wanted everybody to kind of work together. Maybe not form a supranational alliance like the EU, but he certainly wants to try to do everything he can to prevent, Germany getting screwed over, Germany getting attacked and invaded. But again, the issue is, how do you maintain the balance of power in the Balkans while trying to help your allies who have competing interests? And so what we're going to see is in this Treaty of Berlin, they overturn the Treaty of San Stefano. San Stefano had basically given Russia everything it wanted. It was signed because Russia had won. Russia had beat the Turks. The Turks are not in a negotiating position. And the Treaty of Berlin literally says, no, you can't do that. You can't change stuff. And so what they decided is, okay, we'll give Cyprus to Britain. That'll placate Britain. That'll alienate them from France. We will give stuff, Bosnia-Herzegovina, to Austria-Hungary. And it reduces what the Russians get. It makes Romania, Serbia, Montenegro, Bulgaria, makes them independent. And so what happens? This is the death knell of the Dreikaiserbunde, because Russia is now alienated. And Bismarck will try. Bismarck will do everything he can to keep that alliance going. But German national interests are more, anti-French and more trying to keep the Austrians in line. And so as such, Russia will just keep alienating. And what we're going to say is from the very beginning, what is World War I? Okay, how does World War I actually start? Think about it. Consider this. World War I could have been such a small war that I wouldn't get to teach a course about it. And this course apparently is very popular. We were capped at 45, then capped at 60, and now I think we've got some 65 students in. This is the most populous upper division class I have ever taught, and I am loving it. But this almost might not have been a class at all. Why? Austria goes to war with Serbia. Serbia calls in its alliance with Russia. Austria, Serbia fight. The rest of the world stays out, and nobody cares. But instead, what happens is as you get these two factions, everybody starts trying to build an alliance system. And what should have been a small war, Austria fighting Serbia, Russia, who wants to compete in the Balkans as early as 1878, says, oh, hell no, and now here we go. And now we're starting to just build up those causes that will lead to a general war. But this war is going to be much, much deadlier, okay? Let's just have a kind of look just how quickly things are going to change, all right? Well, the 1866, the Zonadelgewehr, shows the utility of, breech-loading rifles, okay, and eventually they say, well, what about metallic case? That comes a bit later. Then 1870, quick-firing artillery, machine guns. And so all of that's now going to be taken and implemented so that by the 1870s, Most nations have a single-shot rifle using a metallic cartridge. That way you can keep up a better rate of fire. And you don't have to worry about gas venting back into your face. As a great example, okay, this is my British Martini Henry Mark II actually this was found in Nepal, and apparently had been so polished the date has been removed, believe it or not. But, I mean, this is the rifle that the British will literally conquer half of the world in the late 19th century. If you've ever seen Zulu Dawn, the Four Feathers, stuff like that, this is the rifle they use. But it's got a drawback, okay? It's got, okay, you see it's got a lever system, but it's not magazine fed. So each time you got to pop a round in, pull it, fire it, drop it, round in. Not to mention with this lever, there's this problem. You can't really fire this prone. It will clip the ground. So you've got to kick it out like that, and that will cut down your rate of fire. And so we get this issue then of, okay, this is good, but not good enough. Now the bolt, okay, as we saw with the Chassepot, the Zunargewehr, that offers help. But there's the issue, how can you combine the machine gun? And in 1877, during the Russo-Turkish War, what we see is the Turks had bought just large stocks of American-made Winchesters. Now, same problem, they're lever-action rifles, but they're magazine weapons. And remember, magazine stuff had been used in the American Civil War, albeit briefly in the forms of cavalry weapons or the Henry rifle. And now what you had was a weapon where the soldier could fire, several shots in quick rapidity. This is a battlefield game changer. And within, very short order in the 1870s, nations all over the planet will begin adopting magazine-fed weapons. With the noted exception of the United States. We will not adopt one until 1892. We're like, F the world, we like our trapdoor Springfields. Whereas the rest of the world, even guys like Switzerland, this is a Swiss Model 1878 Vetterli, okay, will adopt magazine-fed bolt-action weapons. It's a lot like, just a standard bolt-action rifle. It's black powder, but it is magazine-fed. And this particular one was made in, I believe this is first or second year production, so it's got M78, so I believe 78 or 79. But what this does is now, even small Switzerland realizes this is a battlefield game changer. The problem is, tactics have not evolved, okay? And what do I mean by that? Think about it. Go back to your old muskets, okay, with the volley fire. Ready, aim, fire. Or in the British, ready, present, fire. Well, that's how they still wanted to fight. What we're going to see is, although war had shown these are now small unit actions, instead of, just lines of guys firing, that's how people were still trained. Weapons would often have what we call magazine cutoffs, where what a magazine cutoff was literally typically just a slider thing that would interrupt the flow of a magazine so that, ammunition could not be drawn from the magazine. Because the idea, even with this guy, even with this, magazine-fed weapon, that how it works, I don't know if you can see it because of the horrible lighting. If I turn it, there's a hole here where, you put the cartridges. When I open the bolt, it just pops it up. You get this little feed ramp, and then, boom. Well, even this, how it works is I have to pull the bolt all the way back till it clicks. In practice, they were still going to use volleys. You'd open the bolt, slowly pull it back, drop a single cartridge in, and then close it. Because the idea, and I'm not even making this up, and this is going to be something that exists even into the First World War. People were worried soldiers were going to fire too much. That a soldier would get excited and just blam, 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 blam. Hell yeah, I would. And so what we see is we're not going to have like 100 guys volley firing, but yet the thought is that even at the squad level, a sergeant will be directing his 12 guys to fire volleys. And so we see weapons are outstripping technology. In the Franco-Prussian War, we have 2.1 million men under arms. Industrialization means we can crank out British martinis that they will use until 1888. Or we can crank out, these Swiss Vetterlis, which, again, also until the 1880s. We can, crank out trapdoor Springfields, whatever. But we're not going to teach our soldiers how to employ them to the best of their abilities. We're outstripping doctrine and innovation. And that will be a lasting problem all the way up. That will literally die in the trenches of 1914 to an extent. If we look at imperialism and overseas expansion, if you see, this is the scramble for Africa, the carving up of China. And what we're going to see is this is the other great failing leading to World War I. In the sense, you've got weapons like this. Okay, let's again go back to the Martini Henry. The gun that, builds the British Empire. Okay, well, here's the problem. Who are you fighting? Okay, well, let's look at the Zulus in South Africa. They don't have martinis. They don't have magazine weapons. They don't have Gatling guns. They have trade muskets and spears. So this gives you a technological edge over your enemy. And what happens is so many of the generals and officers in the First World War got their start in these wars of imperialism. They never had to worry about, how do I charge a machine gun nest? How do I charge an enemy with the same guns that I've got? Instead, it's always, well, hey, they've got spears, I have these, blam, we win. And so what all of this will lead to, again, is just absolute slaughter on the battlefield. Economic success is tied directly to imperialism. The more stuff you can produce, the more markets you got to have. The more stuff you need to produce, the more resources you need. And so, again, an imperial colony is useful both as an outlet for manufactured goods as well as a one-stop shop for resources. And what we see is, Africa, Asia, they're going to be just gobbled up by Europe. Again, I mentioned Indochina, which is modern Vietnam right here. France needs it because it has one of the best supplies of rubber. Well, what do you need rubber for in 1870? You need it for the gas seal of a Chassepot bolt-action rifle. And again, this just all feeds into each other. If you look, let's say Africa, okay? By 1914, only Liberia and Ethiopia are not under European control. And the Italians tried in Ethiopia and they were kicked out in 1896 in the First Italo-Abyssinian War. And so what we're going to see is why. Why do they do this? Because these European nations are better equipped, they're better organized, they're ruthless. I mean, let's even think the Belgian Congo. Okay, well, when Belgium comes in, you do not want to live in this world of imperialism. You do not want to be one of these people. And then, if we're going to at least try for something of a bad joke, I haven't made a joke in about 20 minutes, I'm getting twitchy. What is it? Oh crap, I just forgot his name. Oh god. Well, it's gone. The guy that crossed... Eddie Izzard, there we go. In one of his stand-up skits, he said, here's how you can explain imperialism. We have a flag, you don't. So we can plant this flag and say, this is ours, not yours. Well, that's exactly what Europe is going to do. They're going to plant flags all over Africa, and then they're going to squabble about it. And what this squabbling does, it's interesting that you can have imperialism thanks to naval developments, which we'll talk again about more next week. But you can also do it because there's no major wars in Europe. You don't need the armies at home. But at the same time, all that close competition, say, Britain next to Germany here, Britain next to France here, Britain and France next to Italy here, what that does is put nations that otherwise might not care about each other into direct competition. And there's going to be some threats of war over this. If we look, the biggest issue, okay, if we look at imperial designs, is Britain already has a large overseas empire. They've had that since the 18th century. That's how we get here, because we're like, no, we hate tea. No, we don't like tea. Screw you guys. France had wanted to expand into Africa and wants to expand into Asia. Well, Wilhelm II, now the monarch of Germany, looks at what's going on. And Wilhelm says, I want Germany to have a place in the sun. Why does Belgium get the Congo? Why does France get so much of Africa? Why does Britain get a huge chunk of the world? Why not Germany? And so for Germany, for them, imperialism is tied into this idea that Germany should be a global power and what they would call Weltpolitik, or world politics. Because the idea is this. Germany, remember, in 1869 is Prussia, okay? Prussia does not have a navy. Prussia does not need a navy. In fact, the old joke had been that whereas most places are states with an army, Prussia is an army that just happens to have a state as well. But now Germany is a large, industrial, centralized nation that has a wealth of resources. Why shouldn't it have a navy? And people are using those navies to go conquer the planet. Why shouldn't it? And so what we see is we get competition between Germany and Britain. Britain is ever terrified of somebody encroaching on its empire. And there's also this. How do you have such a large empire? You have to have a large navy. And not just sailing ships. Okay, now we're talking about steam-powered ships. They're not steel, not just yet. So we've got some ironclads, but we're not at the steel renovation, not just yet. But the issue is this. You've got to have a large navy. Britain had a standing policy to have a navy larger than the first and second largest navies combined. If Germany wants a massive buildup, then Britain would feel threatened. Because after all, what good is a colony, and this is going to play a factor in the First World War, what good is a colony if you can't get that materials to your colony? What good is a colony if you cannot sell your stuff to that colony? So, you've got to have a large navy. You've got to ensure control. And if Germany does anything to jeopardize that control, Britain must respond. So we're going to see, again, this concept of the Great Game. Britain and Russia will clash in Afghanistan. And this is not just directed at Germany. Britain and France will see issues. Britain and everybody, actually, will see issues. Because the fact is, each side is trying to compete. Now, every empire wants to expand. But paradoxically, expanding your empire meant encroaching on someone else's. So rather than keep things the same, everyone was worried. I want to expand mine, but I don't want you to encroach on me. Or, as I expand mine, as I take more of Africa, now my empire butts up against yours. Now I'm worried about you encroaching on me. And what this does is we see that balance of power in Europe, that concert of Europe, that Congress of Vienna, this long thing of peace, just kind of gets eroded as all of these nations begin to slowly squabble. I have no idea what that loud beeping is. So if we look at the game of empire, just to fling some stuff at you, what we're going to see is 1871 to 1914. I mean, it's peace, but it's unstable. Anything could jeopardize it. From 1873 to 1896, coincidentally, 2 years where the United States sees panic, we see a decrease in free trade. It's a worldwide depression. And so each nation now has to compete economically to try to make its empire viable. The last thing you want is to go bankrupt over your empire. We're going to see numerous wars. We're not even going to get into all of them. But the Anglo-Zulu, there's wars in Morocco, there's wars in Namibia, just all of these small little wars. And in many cases, they're not just like stand-up and fights, but they're ethnic cleansing and genocide. Okay? We'll see things like the French going into Dahomey and basically killing anybody who resists. The Germans will practice ethnic cleansing in Namibia. There's a really fantastic book about this called Absolute Destruction. And no, the Germans are not Nazis, but against Africans, they were brutal SOBs. The Belgians, the lovable tiny little Belgium that I'm going to make you feel sorry for in a couple of weeks. They're going through and literally plundering the Congo. They got lazy about ethnic cleansing. They literally wanted to depopulate part of the region. But then people, they wrote the letter of the law saying that, okay, we're going to charge you. You've got to go kill, however many people. And for each set of hands you bring me, I'll give you X amount of gold. I'm going to pay you for killing people. Well, they just realized you don't got to kill them, just chop off hands, and then there you go, you get your money. And so literally, you've got people running around with only one hand because the Belgians phone in ethnic cleansing. And it just turns to actual brutality. And so what we're going to see is all of this whole balance of power, this whole system crumbles as, what is it, four nations, Britain, Germany, France, and Portugal, add in that Belgium, divide Africa into 50 different colonies. And I cannot stress this enough. Nobody cares about the individual culture. Nobody cares about individual populations. This idea we have today, cultural appropriation or respect of culture, that just simply does not exist in this game of empire. The fact is, the idea is to make these people as much like the imperial nation as is humanly possible. And again, I can't stress enough how bloody this kind of thing is going to be. And one of the things that will change it is the Maxim gun. So this is from the British Chitral expedition of 1895. And what you see now is we're equipped with magazine-fed smokeless rifles. These are, I presume they're magazine Lee Enfields. They might be magazine Lee Metfords, the old black powder version, but I would presume they're MLEs. But more important, the Devil's Paintbrush, the Maxim machine gun. Because one thing that people in Africa and Asia do not have access to at all are automatic weapons. Take the Rifle Mitrailleur from the Franco-Prussian War. Now we're going to have Gatling guns. Now we're going to have machine guns. Now we're going to have, with Hiram Maxim, we're going to have the world's first modern machine gun. And it's going to be absolutely deadly. World War I, they would call this the Devil's Paintbrush. And what we're going to see is this is the tipping point. And this should have told people, look, this is how bad war is going to get. But it doesn't. We're going to see that indigenous peoples will often be very brave, skilled. If this had been a 1-to-1 fair match, they would have won. But again, take, I mentioned Dahomey. There's another really good book I read in undergrad, Amazon's a Black Sparta, if you're interested, that they actually had regiments of these badass female warriors that the Europeans would actually compare to mythical Amazons. Okay, never mind Diana Prince, and Wonder Woman. These were real, and they're amazing fighters. But when the French come in and they just attack, they can't do anything against machine guns. There's just nothing they can do. Think Anglo-Zulu War. Again, I mentioned, the movie Zulu, okay, where you see the British with this weapon, the Martini Henry, and the movie gives you the impression it's British riflemen that win the battle. No, they had a pair of Gatling guns at Rorke's Drift. The Zulus barely even got close. And so what we see is we have evidence that enemies armed with melee weapons or with single-shot rifles will be absolutely slaughtered by machine guns. We see that every major nation, again with the exception of the United States, mass adopts machine guns. The United States, as late as 1916, and I quote, "The machine gun is an emergency weapon and only to be used in, when you are about to be overrun." We had 50 machine guns per 20,000 guys. Yeah, no, we were not that smart. We're not. No, not early on. The British, the Germans, the French, the Italians, everybody is adopting machine guns like candy. It's like Oprah with the machine guns. You get a machine gun, you get a machine gun, everybody gets a machine gun. Wait, that's Battlefield 1, never mind. The problem is, nobody thinks of how to fight it. You're fighting the natives who are armed with muskets or spears. That doesn't train you how to work against monsters. That should be armament, not armor. We don't have tanks yet. But it doesn't train you on how to fight an enemy with the same stuff. So everybody basically gets complacent. The fact is, there's not been a general war in so long. People think that it's not going to happen. People think that maybe they've moved beyond war. People think that wars will be slow, they'll be over by Christmas, that spirit and elan can possibly trump machine guns and artillery. And that's going to be a massive problem. So what we see, if we look then kind of drifting back now to the point of empire, which again, empire and weapons are linked in this discussion. Britain Welda has the largest empire in human history. And they become fanatic about protecting it. Whereas the Germans, okay, they just want their empire. They don't even want a big one, but the British, they fear encroachment. And so they begin a naval arms race. They begin building new ships. And so what we see, they want a status quo, but imperialism works against that status quo. And also, okay, take Austro-Prussian War, 7-week war. Think about it. If this is now the world of 1914, okay, if Britain and Germany go to war, well, here's Britain over by Australia. I'm pointing at my monitor because you can totally see that. But up here at Papua New Guinea, that's Germany. Oops. Or what if, let's see, here at Tsingtao, there's German stuff. And so what we're going to see, this will be a world war. Briefly, I just want to talk about the Boer War, because the Boer War sets up a lot of stuff in the sense, the British now have modern magazine-fed weapons. They've put smokeless weapons, even we'll talk about that in just a second. They put their army in khaki. They realize that bright red uniforms in the desert are kind of a dumb idea. And for as stupid as that sounds, the same time they're using this Martini Henry, they are wearing bright red uniforms in the desert. Now, why this is important is numerous things. One, we see that competition. Now, the Anglo-Boer War. Okay, technically, this is the second Anglo-Boer War. The Boers are the native Dutch population of South Africa. They were resisting British colonial rule. The Germans are funneling aid to the Boers. By now, we have the wonderful, beautiful German weapon known as the German Mauser. Don't worry, I didn't bring mine out. I actually have several. I did not bring mine out today, so we won't get to see it today. I am sorry. But what's more important about that is the Germans show that they want to compete against Britain. The British, again, cocky. Now, they first used this in the Modest War, 1884 to 1889. But what's important about this is we're starting to see that modern weapons make colorful uniforms give way. Think about it. With a smokeless rifle, especially, which we have since 1886, we'll come back to that, what we're going to see is you now have high-velocity weapons that can be fired without leaving a smoke trail, that are accurate up to possibly 1 kilometer. Red sticks out. Khaki blends in. Okay? And so what we're already seeing is that this idea of war being fun and noble is giving away. We're acknowledging that war will be bloody. And then things get worse. Believe it or not, the French do something good. And as much as I will make jokes about the French, here's where they get things right. Because in the 1880s and 1890s, they're going to adopt two things that will change warfare forever. On the left, in 1886, they will adopt this wonderful weapon. The Fusil d'Infanterie Model 1886, the world's first smokeless magazine-fed rifle. And what this does is, not only does this trigger an arms race across the world, but what this does is not only does it make everything obsolete, but you now have a weapon that's lighter. If you look, it's less bulky than that Swiss Vetterli. Let me get closer to the camera so you can see. Ammunition can be smaller. We're shrinking calibers. So, whereas the Martini Henry was in .450 caliber, and the Swiss Vetterli is in .41 caliber, this is in what we call .32 caliber. By this time, the French would use the metric system, so this is 8 millimeter versus what would that be, 11 millimeter and 10.4 millimeter. Now we're at 8 millimeter. Bullets are smaller, higher velocity, longer range, more accurate. And more importantly, I can discharge this weapon from a foxhole and you're not going to see the muzzle flash. Now, as great as that sounds, here's how we can see that, again, technology is outstripping doctrine. Let me cock the weapon. Okay. There we go. Do you see this button? Let me turn this button right there. Okay, so this button right there. It's kind of, I don't know why the lighting is so screwed up right now today. This button is a magazine cutoff. This particular label was made in 1886 with the updates from 1893. It was rebarreled. I don't know if you can read the date or not, but it was rebarreled in 1920, meaning that this one went through the entirety of the First World War. It has a magazine cutoff. The magazine is a tubular magazine, exactly like the Swiss Vetterli. So to load it, what I would do, drop the bolt back, okay, making sure the cutoff is set to on, meaning the magazine is turned on, and you'll see a feed ramp down there. I push it down, and I take my 8 rounds, and I have to one at a time load it in. Okay, this weapon doesn't have stripper clips. That does not come out till 1891 with the Argentinian Mauser. Then what I do is I pop the bolt back to bring up the feed ramp, and this is how the French would have had me do this. I now set the cutoff to off, and then what I do, drop a round in, discharge my weapon at the enemy, draw it back, and at the command, grab another round, bring it forward, drop it in, close it, and again, at the command of fire, fire again, open, and again, just this very slow, methodical firing only on command. The idea, even though this weapon is the forerunner of every modern weapon that is in use in the world today, the idea is still treat it as a single shot, as if it were a Brown Bess musket. I am only, and literally this is how European doctrine would be, I'm only allowed to flip this magazine to on in dire emergencies of, let's say I'm about to be overrun. And then I open the bolt, I still have to drop in at least one, fire, and then when I pull the bolt back, this time by closing the bolt, it activates the magazine, so it starts feeding from that 8-round magazine. It sounds clunky, it sounds stupid, and it kind of is. But for most weapons of World War I, magazine cutoffs would be somewhat standard. It's about 50-50, believe it or not. Only those later ones, the German Mauser, the Austrian Steyr-Mannlicher, the Italian Carcano, they did not, the Russian Mosin Nagant, they did not have mag cutoffs. But the Lebel, the British Lee Enfield, the American Springfield, absolutely. Now, that's the advance in the 1880s. The 1890s is the model 1897 75mm artillery piece, the famous French 75, which actually there's a cocktail named after the French 75. It's pretty good. I got a story about that I'll tell you in a second. So what's so important about this artillery piece is it had a pneumatic recoil system, which what that means is think of your old gun, your old artillery pieces you see in the movies. They fire, and the whole gun rolls back, and then the crew's got to push it forward, and then you load it again. Well, the recoil is just the gun. So when it fires, the gun comes back, comes forward back into battery, but the carriage, let's assume this hand is the carriage, stays still. So I'm aimed at a target, I fire, it comes back, I can fire again. I don't have to keep re-aiming. It also had a wonderful breech mechanism that literally, as the gun recoiled back, the loader could literally flick it open as the gun came back and use the momentum of the gun to knock the shell out of the breech. So what you have is this weapon with, and we're not even done with its innovations yet, that can fire very rapidly, that you don't have to consistently re-aim. So what that means is I think French gunners could do upwards of 25 to 30 rounds per minute in burst fire. Without aiming, one gun could shower a target with 30 25-pound shells. Have a battery of 4, that's 120 shells just dropping on a fairly small area in 60 to 90 seconds. It was longer range because this one is now, smokeless powder, using the same thing as the Lebel. And so what that means is you'll see the muzzle flash, but you're not going to see this huge smoke cloud off in the distance where enemy artillery is. But it gets even better. Despite the fact it's longer ranged, despite the fact you could pull it, behind the gun line, it also included a gun shield. It's only a few millimeters thick, but the idea is if infantry you're seeing, or you've got to fire direct sights or whatever, Your crew is protected. It's got a shield. It won't stop an artillery round, but it'll stop rifle bullets. And overnight, in a 10-year period, 1886 to 1897, you have literally rendered every rifle in the world obsolete and every artillery piece in the world obsolete. And so what we're going to see is nations are going to adopt as much stuff as they can. They're going to copy this as much stuff as they can. The Germans, the French, have their rifle in 1886. The Germans pump out theirs in 1888, as do the British. The United States follow suit in 1892. Russia and Italy will in 1891. The Austrians will in 1895. I mean, just very quick modernization. Artillery. Okay, the Germans, literally the year before the French 75, 1896, adopt a new Feldkanone, or field gun. And as soon as the 75 comes out, they literally build their own produced copy, retrofit it to this old gun, and we get the FK96NA, the Feldkanone 96 Neue Art, or new type. And the whole idea is simple. You've got to keep pace. But it sounds like the world's learning. We're getting massive technological innovation. Except, here's the French infantry in 1870. This is how they would be clad in the Franco-Prussian War. Here they are in 1914. Note the difference, specifically lack thereof. Technology is outstripping innovation, and I cannot stress that enough. Now what I want to do is talk about if we're going to keep with our discussion of empire. This video is going to run a little long. I love talking about guns, apparently. So it's actually what my master's thesis was on, was the U.S. adoption of breech-loading and magazine rifles. So I kind of like this stuff. Fun fact, in my collection I have a American Krag Jorgensen model 1896. And according to the serial number and research I've done, it's actually been cataloged because it is the last one out of Springfield Armory in May 1901. There we go. So what I want to talk about now is the Boxer Rebellion. And the Boxer Rebellion is not only the culmination of imperialism, but it's also just this kind of ironically sad and stupid moment in world history. Why do I say that? Well, what the Boxer Rebellion is China has been carved up by European nations by 1900. And the Qing dynasty basically doesn't work. I mean, the Qing emperor is a child, his mother is the dowager, she's running it. But the issue is, China is in debt. Okay, railroads are owned by European nations. Each nation has embassies in Peking. I'll actually attach a video, if I can find it, from the movie 55 Days at Peking that basically shows what a normal day would be. Where at the beginning of each day, you're going to have every European nation playing its national anthem in the capital city of China. And the fact is, Chinese nationalists don't like this for obvious reasons. This, undermines their authority as a sovereign nation and one of the world's oldest sovereign nations. And so what we're going to see is in 1899, violence will break out and we get rebellion in 1900. And the idea is they wanted to attack missionaries, throw out the European governments, basically isolate China. We call them the Boxer Rebellion because their motto was a giant red clenched fist that looked like a boxing glove, hence the Boxer Rebellion. This is a European name. And the Qing dynasty basically didn't know whether to support or condemn it. And we see that some factions do condemn, others do support. But why I want to mention it in this course is it's a paradox of things to come. It's the European nations fielding all of their new stuff, all their new toys, but at the same time, they're going to work together to prevent the status quo. This is the best photograph I can imagine for how screwed up the world is in 1900. You're all taking this class, so you know what's coming in 1914. I hope I don't spoil it. I don't know. I mean, my favorite stories ever for my online Survey of American History course once, somebody emailed and said, Dr. Prince, I just want to let you know I'm learning so much stuff. I never knew Lincoln was assassinated before. Took everything I could to not say I didn't know Lincoln was into butt stuff before. But, some people don't know this. So if you don't know that World War I is coming, I hate to spoil it for you. But look at this photo. The guy on the left is British. The guy next to him is American. The guy next to him is Russian. The guy next to him is from British India. The guy in the center is German. The guy next to him is French. The guy next to him is Austrian. The guy next to him is Italian. And the guy on the right is Japanese. In 14 years, the German and the Austrian will be fighting almost all of the rest. Literally, America is the only one going to be, well, actually almost all, because Italy will join in 15 and America in 17. But those, here we're all working together. It's all the Anglo-European and Japan against, this issue of imperialism. And yet, 14 years, it all falls apart. Okay. Why did I do this? How I broke it down. Japan, Russia, Britain, and France. They are going to be the triple entente. Germany, Austria, Hungary, Italy. They are the central powers, though Italy will drop out. And the United States, we're the big neutral nation. But in 1900, we all contribute 54 warships, 5,000 Marines, 52,000 Army troops, and we all work together until this rebellion is put down in 1901. So it's just kind of that interesting thing of the world will be at war, yet until it actually happens, until there is that damn silly thing in the Balkans, the world will work together to preserve the status quo. But that status quo has one more thing kind of chipping away at it, and that we can thank the United States for. This guy, Alfred Thayer Mahan, a lecturer at the U.S. Navy War College, who writes The Influence of Sea Power Upon History, 1866 to 1783. And the whole point of his book is twofold. One, it's a history book. But what it basically says is that, look, all large empires need a navy. That you've got to have a massive navy to be a successful country. He says that, we need to have modern steel ships. You need to have a worldwide refueling network. He basically makes the point that you cannot have an imperial power without a large navy. And the book will be read in both foreign and domestic military circles. I mean, this is not going to be a book that's ignored outside of the United States, as so much was. But supposedly even Wilhelm II reads this book, and everybody says, I've got to have that. And this is what fundamentally changes our nation, in the sense that the United States says, okay, we need a U.S. Navy. Historically, for us in the United States, navies are disposable. Okay? Well, we have sort of ish one in the American Revolution. Then we get rid of it. Then we'll build 6 frigates, and we'll mothball most of them after the War of 1812. Then we build a navy at, the Civil War. And right now, in 1890, our navy is literally 3/4 old Civil War ships, some of which are iron, others are wooden. And this is what says, no, we need to build a new navy. We need to build a steel navy and keep it. Well, the world looks at this and says, yes, you do. Yes, we do. We all do as well. And so what we're going to see is the late 19th century, as if, rifles and artillery and machine guns and imperialism wasn't bad enough. Now we've got to add the naval component. And so here, the Battle of Santiago on July the 3rd, 1898, with the American armored cruiser Brooklyn and what looks to be the battleship Oregon behind, basically blowing apart a Spanish, what used to be a cruiser. And so what we're going to see is just kind of a timeline of naval stuff. The 1850s, we see the introduction of the ironclad warship with HMS Warrior and the French Glory. Then in the 1860s, we get, a couple of American turreted ironclads, the Monitors. But then the 1870s, we get actual turreted ironclads, bigger ships, not necessarily ocean-going, but these are the precursor to the modern battleship. Finally a successor to that old ship of the line. Well, then the 1880s, now we can apply steel. And for a lot of this in the United States, we can thank the Gilded Age. Guys like Andrew Carnegie, the Bessemer process, the ability to mass produce steel Well, now what we can do is we can pump out cruisers and other ships like that. The 1890s, we see new steel battleships. And some are coastal, some will be seagoing. But we see that throughout the world, it's not really that focused. Okay, we don't really have this idea of, well, these types and classes of ships. What we do see is that most people, even now Germany, are wanting a navy. Industrialization gives you the ability, and imperialism gives you the need. And so what we see is Britain will want a navy second to none. And so that means that Britain will always try to outbuild the second and third largest navies combined. But that also means that the more somebody builds up to be that second or third largest navy, that Britain will feel threatened. And so Britain has to build more. And as Britain builds more and it becomes more expensive and she's got more invested in the empire, the more she's got to basically be fanatic in protecting it. And so we see competition. Who can build better ships, more ships, things like that. And so what we're going to see, the this is the Royal Navy of the 1890s. With, these are early, what we now know as pre-dreadnought battleships. They're not that effective. They're stupidly slow, especially if you've ever played with the Mikasa in World of Warships. You'll know how painfully slow these things are. Prone to breaking down, but the British have a lot of them. And here the German Kaiserliche Marine, the first starts of the new Imperial German Navy, the Kaiserliche Marine, the Kaiser's Navy. But if you look, her ships are nowhere near as imposing, nor as numerous as the British. But nonetheless, every German ship that gets built, Britain feels threatened. So what we see is the status quo is shattered in 1888 because Kaiser Wilhelm II takes power. And so he too wants to get rid of the Three Emperors League. He wants maritime trade routes. He wants a new German Navy. And for him, he loved the Navy. He would frequently call it my Navy. And so what we see is Germany is now ascendant. We now have a new leader that doesn't care about the balances of power. For all that Bismarck tries to instruct Wilhelm II, Wilhelm literally doesn't care. And so what we see is, by 1888, we have a new ruler, a new nation, this desire to, have a massive world empire, new weapons. And so what we're going to see is things beginning to shift. And I put this in as just kind of a foreshadowing of what we'll talk about next week. But we get an Anglo-Japanese alliance that basically the idea is, okay, if Germany is this threat to world power, then Britain cannot be quite so overextended. And so Britain has to start making deals, because right now why Britain has to have such a large navy is it's got to have ships to protect the British Isles, ships in the Mediterranean, ships in South America, ships in India, ships in China, ships in Australia. And every ship that it can pull off from somewhere else, that beefs up the size of the navy that could counter the Germans. And so what we're getting, well over 20 years before World War I breaks out, we're beginning to see the posturing, because Britain is terrified that Germany is going to gobble the world. The why is biting into water is beyond me, but whatever. So I think that's going to wrap it up today. I will post, there's a really, really, really good mini-series called Fall of Eagles that documents basically the rise and fall of the Habsburg, Hohenzollern, and Romanov dynasties from about the mid-19th century through the end of the First World War. And I think I'll post the episode dealing with this idea of Bismarck being the honest broker. And so you can kind of see, what the original outlook was of Europe, what they were originally wanting, and then kind of see how that just gets destabilized by new technological developments and the ascendancy of Wilhelm II. Which I have to say, I love Wilhelm II because that mustache, I've always been jealous of that. I can't grow, I can't do facial hair. I've tried, it simply doesn't work. Alright, I think that's going to wrap it up for today. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. And as always, I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye, guys.